Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy. So, this is Claire's part 2, and I'm just letting you know this is one hell of a doozy. It's very long. It's gonna fuck with your head. We decided not to split it into a third episode, so take breaks as necessary because you're gonna need them. Congratulations, Claire. My mind has been fucked for the day.
Yay!
Woohoo!
Okay, now for part 2 on Fred West and Rosemary West's murdering sprees. If you haven't listened to part 1, you should stop now because none of the rest of this shit's gonna make any sense. Okay, now we left off on Fred and Rosemary officially get married, and we're going into the beginning of 1972.
You want to throw out some trigger warnings again, real quick?
Sure. We've got child abuse and molestation, bodily harm, dismemberment, mutilation, suicide, rape, torture, all the fun things.
But no bestiality this time?
I
was just kidding.
I guess we might touch on it since it's been brought up before. We can throw some bestiality in there since you'd have a problem if we didn't bring it up.
Well, I don't have a problem. I just feel like Fred, maybe they get a family dog. You don't know.
There's no.
I don't know.
This. Just leave it alone. Put the goat down.
Cat, dog. We've ruled out the chickens.
Okay, so just like Fred's first marriage, nobody shows up except for Fred's brother John, who's the best man. Now, several months later, Rosemary is pregnant with child number 2. So they decide with their growing family to move into a 3-story home nearby. They originally start renting it, but later buy it and start making renovations to it. So the upstairs they convert into bed sits. I had to Google that. It's apparently single occupancy rooms to supplement income. So basically like a rental room.
To rent?
Yeah. So they didn't have bathrooms. It was just the room. And Fred installs a cooker and a wash basin on the first floor landing in order to maintain privacy and keep the lodgers from going to the ground floor where the rest of the family lived. Now, June 1st, 1972, May June is born. Shortly after May's birth...
Wait. What?
Her name is May June. To each their own, I say, but I too did the, May June?
Are they going to have July, August next?
I don't know. Like, I feel like they want to name her May, and then I was like, oh, she was born in June. But whatever. That's certainly not the weirdest ass name I've heard, but
no.
Shortly after May's birth, Rosemary begins working as a prostitute, operating from the upstairs residence, and she would get most of her clients from local magazines.
Wait.
Now, like she would advertise in the local paper kind of version thing.
How the hell do you advertise for that?
I do not know what goes on in Britain and whether, well, I don't know, Andrea. I don't live there, and I'm not a prostitute that advertises in the magazines, so I don't know. I'm just reading you what my research said. That's how she advertised, was local magazines. Personal ads would be my guess.
I would be curious.
Now, Fred encouraged this with both males and female lodgers. For her to recruit clients, that is, and also any of his coworkers.
Of course, naturally.
So Rosemary would brag that no one could completely satisfy her, and Rosemary would gradually increase her brutality during sex, subjecting her partners to suffocation and inserting large dildos into her partners. Now, if a woman complained... If a woman complained or resisted, it excited Rosemary, and she would just kind of slap him around a little bit and ask him, "Aren't you woman enough to take it?" So it's just like not all of their subjects ended in murder. Fred will later throw Rosemary under the bus a little bit and say that it just happened because Rosemary um, got a like just went away with what she was on, like her tirade, and got too mean.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but Fred and Rosemary regularly had threesomes and sought women who were interested in pushing their sexual limits involving strong measures of dominance, bondage, pain, and violence. They also had a plethora of bondage and restraint devices, and then an ever growing collection of magazines and photographs, and also included child pornography and bestiality. Now,
That's a no-go on me.
down the road, they would expand their collection to videos, both homemade and commercial. But they had no there were no lines drawn. Everything was fair game, and they sought people out interested in expanding those horizons.
Okay.
Now,
I'm sure a
Rosemary,
lot of those people got more than they bargained for.
I feel like, because how do you go to the police when you're like, I willingly went to a prostitute and she smacked me around and stuffed this giant ass dildo in me while I was strapped to the bed?
I wonder if Fred was involved in that at all, or was it just her?
We'll get there.
Oh,
So, Rosemary's prostitute room had many peepholes to allow Fred to watch Rosemary with her clients. He also was equipped with a baby monitor so he could listen from anywhere in the house. Now,
good.
as she worked up her business and had money that where they would make the improvements or additions to the house, there would be a red light outside that bedroom door to let him know not to disturb her because she had a client in there, like the original Red District. But also, she had a separate doorbell installed, so clients would ring that one, so she would know who's at the door. And then later on, they would also have a private bar installed in that room for her clients. And then that door would always be locked. Rosemary was the only one with a key, and she proudly wore it around her neck.
I feel like Fred would take that if he wanted it.
I don't know. She's she's a little bit crazy herself, and I think that's why he was drawn to her. Now, like I said, Rosemary's earnings would fund all those home improvements. So there's
Man,
that.
no wonder she wasn't easily satisfied. That's like hot dog down a hallway action going on now.
That's probably why it was the size it was. Other ladies couldn't take it.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
by 1977, Rosemary's father became tolerant of Rosemary and Fred's marriage and begins chit chatting with her again. Now,
Because
it's
he sees she's selling her services and he's interested in becoming a client.
now
He's
he
disappointed. He got it for free for so long and now he might have to actually pay.
now he does end up becoming her client.
Oh, Jesus, Claire.
That's why I was laughing, because you think that he was sniffing around. He saw an ad in the paper, is what happened. And he's like, oh, here's my second chance. So part of me is curious if he found out about the prostitution first and then was like, okay, Fred's not too bad. And he just missed his daughter in a very gross way. But I don't know. Now,
I was
somewhere,
100% making fun of him just to find out that
yeah,
I was on point with it. That's not okay.
yeah. Again,
No,
that all
you
this
setting me up like
research.
that was not okay.
Oh, none of it's okay, mind you. So, somewhere in this section, when Rosemary's father pokes his head back in their life, and that's not like
Among other
a,
things.
a pun for, but
Yeah.
anywho, they start like a little cafe that inevitably fails. But I'm just going to throw that in there because I don't know what's with everybody in cafes. But they tried to start one and then it flopped. But
Because they were busy.
now, in 1983, Rosemary has now had 8 children, at least
Jesus.
3 conceived by clients, but Fred willingly claims them, explaining their darker skin tones of other siblings because his great grandmother was a black woman.
Sorry.
So again, he's not a genius, but that's how he told. You'd think he'd just go the route of adoption like the first go round, but whatever. Fred is takes them all as his own. Now, when the
Mhm.
children turn about 7, they begin doing daily chores around the house and are not permitted to socialize outside the home. They
Did
had
they clean their mall's sex room?
no, they weren't allowed in there.
Well, at least
They
they got that going for them.
they had strict rules with severe punishments, almost
Ugh.
always physical. Now, when I was first reading this, I thought it was a little weird that they made it seem like it was a horrible thing for a parent to do to have a child at 7 begin doing daily chores. I don't know if it was the way I read it, but I was like, "And at 7, grab a broom." I mean, obviously, you don't get hit with the broom if you did it wrong, but
So I'm a terrible parent then, because like I make my kids help wipe the dinner table down and set it for dinner, and
yeah, well, I just thought it was weird that they made it seem like the horror started at age 7 when they were asked to do daily chores. Yeah. The problem I have is the whole severe physical punishment,
yeah.
that's not
No,
okay.
I just take my kids' devices. They would probably prefer severe
N
punishment over taking their devices.
Yeah. Now the children all feared their parents, in particular Rosemary, because she's kinda
Mm.
like the ringleader of this. She's the one who usually does the punishing, but she was also very careful not to leave marks, which I find interesting because even though she tries not to leave marks, the kids do end up with marks on them, but not so
So
bad that anyone says anything.
so she's a sadistic piece of garbage, and I feel like at this point she's right up there with being almost worse than her husband.
I feel like she's smarter than Fred, and he just going along with it because he's got somebody to be in his games with him, and I feel like at this point, since she's the one making most of the money, making the decisions, controlling the finances, and that aspect, that she's becoming that head of the household and everyone answers to her, so her reign is just becoming darker. Okay. Now, Heather and her younger brother, Stephen, run away, but come home several weeks later after sleeping it rough out in the wilderness and staying with friends. They are severely beaten on their return home. Now,
Oh,
between 1972 and 1992, the West children are admitted to the ER 31 times, and it's
gosh.
never once reported to social services. Which initially, when I was looking at it, I was like, okay, well, that's a span of 30 years. So with 8 children, that's one visit a year. It doesn't seem too bad, but I also don't know the extent of the injuries and if it was the same child kind of thing. And then nobody's even going, huh, might want to look into these guys. The kids look
I,
scared.
I feel like the record keeping has hopefully improved also.
Probably so. Now, at one time, Stephen was mopping the floor with a cloth when Rosemary accidentally stepped in the bowl that he was using to clean the floor. Her response was hitting him over the head with the bowl and then kicking him in the head and chest.
Again with the
So,
head injuries with people.
just to like, now, mind you, Fred's not an innocent person in this in any way whatsoever, but Rosemary is a different level of disgusting. Um,
Yeah.
she would frequently be enraged at missing kitchen utensils and would take a kitchen knife and you that was used for cutting slabs of meat, so a fairly sharp, ugly knife, and repeatedly cut May's chest until on her rib cage until her rib cage was covered in light score marks. Now this is when May is a baby. She does this in
Jesus.
front of Heather and Steven, and they just stand there sobbing helplessly. So I just envisioned this sick woman slicing like superficial, not that it matters, but superficial scratches to this baby's rib cage while I imagine the baby's screaming. Heather and Steven are screaming. I don't understand how no neighbors are like, there's some shit going on over there.
I mean, I feel like at the same time, the neighbors probably know about the mom's
Oh,
extracurriculars
yeah.
and think that this could just be all fun and games kind of deal.
Perhaps they soundproofed as well
There's a
during.
special place in hell for people like her.
Yeah. But I was just like, I just pictured somebody like staring at the one or like the two kids they're trying to instill fear in and then
Well, yeah.
slicing up their other baby. Now, Fred wasn't lacking in recipient, or Fred would occasionally be a recipient of her wrath, once being chased by Rosemary through the house with a carving knife. Fortunately
Wonder
for
what he did.
Fred, he was able to make it to a room and slam the door, but Rosemary was coming at him full speed when she lunged and he slammed the door. So the knife went into the door, but her hand kept going and she nearly severed 3 of her fingers. And I don't even know why Fred would even open the door, but Rosemary just was so calm that it scared everybody. But she just told him, "Look what you done. You got to take me to the hospital now." So it's just like, what the good luck with those fingers, lady. Take yourself and shut the door. Not saying that that's what happened, but in my mind, it'd be like, no, you get what you get. Go bury him in the lawn. I don't care what you do with them.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
Fred, he's an idiot and easily controlled by Rosemary, so she didn't lose her fingers.
Do we know Fred's IQ? Or was this like pre?
Probably pre that, but
Just curious. It's not
I
important.
would say
It
it's
doesn't justify
low.
anything, but it's interesting to see how easily he's controlled
Well, I do
by.
feel like it's the lower end of things because we've seen a correlation with when lower IQ, they're more easily manipulated and controlled and really don't question anything.
Yeah, and the more assertive people seem to be, the more they seem to back down.
Yeah. So
Like
it
it's
just
just
and you can kind of, I don't know if I'm portraying it well, but you can kind of feel, or I could at least, Rosemary building up to, she was first a molested little girl to, you can kind of feel her power
yeah,
going, and as she like just has more children to manipulate, abuse, and feed that large-headedness of her, that she answers to no one, she makes her own money, she'll do what she wants when she wants to.
makes sense. It doesn't
Now,
make sense, but it makes sense.
yeah. Now, in September 1972, 8-year-old Anna Marie would be taken to the cellar and ordered to undress.
Mm.
Rosemary would get irritated with her hesitation and taking too long and tears the dress from her little body. She's then bound and gagged naked to the mattress for Fred to rape her while Rosemary watches and provides words of encouragement for Fred.
Oh,
Afterwards,
okay.
yeah, it was one of those, she's 8. Not that it would have been better if she's 16, but she's 8.
Yeah, no.
And I don't know what kind of words of encouragement you provide somebody who's raping their 8-year-old daughter, but I but afterwards, Rosemary is, like, laughing as she observes how little, Anna Marie is walking, and she's struggling to walk, and she takes her to the bathroom to go get cleaned up, and in the bathroom is where she explains to Anna Marie that everyone does it to every girl. It's a father's job. Don't worry, and don't say anything to anybody.
That's fucked up.
Yeah, so that's where it's like one of those, they both come from that background of it was okay to them. That's what they were raised growing up. So this is like such a disgusting cycle that sounds way worse than they had it. Um, but Fred and Rosemary would threaten Anna Marie with severe beatings if she told anyone. And Rosemary would take to sexually abusing Anna Marie by herself, whether Fred was home or even if he wasn't. She would bind her to various items of furniture before getting Fred to come rape her. And then she would also force her to do chores while wearing sexual devices and a miniskirt.
What?
I also cannot find what the sexual devices were, so I don't know if that's like the mask thing,
A ball
collar,
gag.
dildos. I don't know what was strapped to her, but
I can't
what?
even crack a joke on that because it's a little girl. And quite frankly, I have to keep my eye on the cases you present because
Yeah.
we're getting back to back nauseating cases. So,
This one took me a while because I had to put it down several times because it was just a level of disgusting that I find it hard to wrap my head around how someone can come up with the things to do and then get someone else to go along with it.
yeah, no.
So she would also, Rosemary that is, would also tell Anna Marie to like quit her crying because she should be grateful for having such caring parents.
Okay.
Now, by age 13, Anna Marie was forced to prostitute herself. Um, Rosemary's clients were told she was 16. Not that to me that makes it any better, but Rosemary would always be present during those sex acts to ensure that Anna Marie said nothing. Now, Rosemary would take 13 or 14-year-old Anna Marie to a local pub and insist she drink several glasses of wine with her and pretend like it's a girl outing, when in reality, she's kind of setting her up. And several hours later, Fred shows up to collect them. And then once they get her in the van, they tie her up, they beat her, and sexually abuse her. They both do.
I'm sorry. I'm not as strong as this little girl. I think I'd kill myself.
Yeah.
At this
No.
point, I like, is she still alive?
Yes.
I props to her.
I already
If
told you,
sh
Anna Marie, she wrote a book.
Oh, yeah. Well,
She like,
we've thrown out lots of names here, and
that's why I said as we go, I'll discuss who's deceased when the body was found because there's so much that if I just tell it all chronologically, some of these bodies, like Anne McFall, the lady who was pregnant with Fred's baby
mhm,
before Catherine even died, they believe that his first murder, she wasn't found for almost 20 years. And she was only
wow.
found because Fred eventually tells them where she is.
Well, props
So
to her because
it's a
I don't
lot.
think I would be as strong as she was as a little girl.
Yeah. Now, in October 1972, 17-year-old Caroline Owens is hired as a nanny. Now, she's originally found as a hitchhiker and moves in because the Wests offer her a job and she's not doing anything else. She's just hitchhiking. Now, when she moves in, she'll notice that Anna Marie is very withdrawn and quiet and kind of just, I mean, you can tell something's off.
Yeah.
And Rosemary would tell Caroline that she was a masseuse, and that's why there was a steady stream of men coming in and out of the house.
Mhm.
Some deep tissue massage, I guess. But
Ignore the slapping sounds. That's just part of it.
now,
Maybe
Fred
it's
would.
Dave. Maybe she uses some of Dave's heated massage stones.
No, Fred would tell her that he's a skilled abortionist and available should she need his assistance. Now, I
Wait,
personally, that
what?
would be the time that I would dip out and be like, right, gotta go. He would talk of little else besides sex. His many abortions, which the women he performed them on were always so overjoyed that they would reward Fred with sex, which I laughed at because really, he's so fucking stupid, he can't even make up a decent story. Don't tell me any woman that in a backyard abortion is going to go, "Oh, thank you so much," and then jump on this nasty ass, yellow teeth, short, gimpy legged man to pay him for his services. That shit did not happen. And this
Uh,
is why going to the IQ thing, he's an idiot. He didn't do
But
any of that. And even if he did one, they probably died.
did 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 she end up sleeping with him?
You are just always getting ahead of the stories.
Well, I'm just simply saying, if she ends up giving it up to him, like by choice, not raped, but by choice, then his gimpy ass
So
is getting somewhere with his lies, which I feel like is not
and
encouraging him
yeah.
to think outside the box.
So let's clear something up right now. In no
Mhm.
world is any man's pickup line, "I'm a skilled abortionist." So, no, she didn't get all, "Oh, yes, take
Okay.
me to the living room." Did not happen. Now,
Okay.
Caroline had a boyfriend, so when she would do her little hitchhiking thing that I mean, she would visit her boyfriend, she would go do whatever, she'd trickle on home. Now, I know we've done cases before where it's the '70s and that's what people were doing. Like, you were a teenager, you were just floating around the country, whether the United States or Europe, evidently. But December '72, Caroline has had enough of the batshit crazy West home and the many sexual advances by both Fred and Rosemary and decides, fuck this shit. I'm headed home. And she starts hitchhiking to get back to her parents.
Mhm.
Now, Fred and Rosemary develop a plan to abduct her. Now, originally, this was more Fred's plan, but he wasn't sure if Rosemary would go along with it. So
Why? The
he's
chick's crazy.
well, they're generally sexual escapades of people who are willing. Now, Caroline rejected them and kind of walked off. So, December 6th, they start driving around looking for Caroline and then they spot her. So, they pull up next to her and lure her into the vehicle with an apology and offer a ride home. Now, Caroline believes them and gets in.
Mm.
Rosemary sat in the back with her to girl chat as Fred drove, and Rosemary began fondling her, Rosemary began fondling her, and Caroline protested. All the while, like she's getting fondled, Fred keeps asking her if she's had sex with her boyfriend that night. I don't know why that was relevant for Fred. Maybe he didn't want sloppy seconds, but she
Maybe he was
start
beating his junk.
I don't know. He's driving the van. So
So,
Caroline starts protesting.
unless it's a
Um,
stick shift, he's got a free hand.
well, she starts protesting, which apparently ruins it for Fred. So he stops, gets out of the car, the van, and punches her unconscious. Now, Rosemary binds her and gags her with a scarf and duct tape. When they get home, they have her drink a cup of drug tea and subject her to prolonged sexual assaults from both her and Fred. Now, Fred would he'd just be talking some serious garbage and lashing her genitals with a belt. Caroline would
Jesus.
scream, and then Rosemary decided that she was too loud, so she puts a pillow over her head and then starts eating out Caroline.
What?
Now, out of fear for her life of a pillow being pushed over her head, that Caroline stops resisting because she's afraid she's going to die. Now, the next morning, hearing Caroline screams, one of the children knock on the door, to which leads Fred to tell her she had better be quiet, or he's going to let all of his black friends come to abuse her, and then they'd bury her under the pavers outside with the hundreds of other young girls.
Oh,
Now,
nice.
he also tells her she better behave herself because she was brought there specifically to pleasure Rosemary. And then he and Rosemary kindly ask her if she would consider being their nanny again. To which a dumbfounded Carolyn is like, sure, I'll be the nanny, just untie me. And then she starts vacuuming and cleaning to prove herself. Now, the second both those dipshits look away, she skedaddles and makes it to her mom's home. So, way to go, Caroline.
Yeah, props to her.
Because I can only imagine after being raped all night, and then when they're like, "So will you be our nanny again?" I'd be like, are you kidding?"
I
Like,
mean I mean, good on her. She survived.
yeah. So, initially, when she gets to her parents' home, she doesn't say anything, but when her mom asks about her bruises, the welts and cuts, she bursts into tears and tells her mom everything that happens. Now, obviously, Caroline's mom is livid and immediately goes to the police, and the Wests are both arrested for assault, bodily harm, and rape. Now, the court date's set for January 12th, 1973, but Caroline backs out because she finds out that everything is hinged on her testimony, and she refuses to testify because she does not want to be in the same place as the Wests. Um, so the Wests plead guilty to reduce charges of just assault and bodily harm, and both get a $75 fine each and
What?
walk free.
What?
Now, after hearing this, Caroline unsuccessfully attempts suicide.
Hold up. Did they not do any type of investigation? I feel like if they went to the house and saw the poor little 13-year-old girl that was being abused, and Caroline didn't speak up while talking to the police and say, huh, you might want to check on the kids, like something doesn't add up there.
I, I, other than hooking it up to shoddy police work and the fact that all of it is hinged on her word rather than there's no evidence of any sort.
So were her bruises and everything healed up by the time the police got involved? Because
No, the West would say that that was consensual and that they have plenty of clients, and at this point, they do. Plenty of people that like to be smacked around, and that's what they come for. And why ever would they
literally,
let her? Yeah,
they come.
well, why ever would they let her go if they didn't think it was consensual? That's their nanny.
That was actually a pretty smart excuse for two dipshits.
Yeah. So it's just one of those, how do you prove that she didn't like it then and wasn't just upset? Because, again, it's her mother that raises the concern and calls the police, not Caroline. So then they tried to play it as the route of she's just embarrassed by what she did and her mom asking questions. So, and if now this one wasn't in there, but I would imagine if whatever drug they gave her, I would guess it was ecstasy. But if she had drugs in her body, I mean, she's clearly going down a path she shouldn't be. Not to say that it was her fault, anyhow, not at all. But it's harder to prove that you weren't a participant then, you know. But again, doesn't make it okay. Not at all. They're disgusting people. I couldn't say it enough. Now, 3 months later, Linda Goff, 19 years old, bumps into Fred and Rosemary through a mutual, I would say, acquaintance, because it ends up being a male lodger at the Wests and somebody she's engaging in an affair with. And then while she's there, she hooks up with a second lodger. And since the Wests are like, we like how this gal works, so they have Linda move into the West's home. So part of me is thinking they were thinking she could be a nanny, but we could also do a second room of prostitution, like run a brothel kind of thing. That's where my head went, at least. But on April 20th, so she's not even there a month, the West would tell the other tenants that Linda was asked to leave after she hit one of the children. But in reality, they killed her. Her
Why?
body is found, or when her body's found, she was dismembered. Her jaw was completely wrapped in adhesive and surgical tape with or to silence her screams. And then she had 2 tubes coming out of her nose so that she could breathe, but she couldn't scream.
Oh,
I feel like
okay.
that was the original leather zipper mask thing. You know what I'm talking about. I do not have one. I have not worn one, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. But they made one out of tape and tubes. So don't even. They also found long strings of fabric that were used to tie her to the ceiling beams, because this is their start of like where they suspend people, sexually abuse them, chop them up to bits, and then bury them. But her body was missing 5 vertebrae, her knee, various finger bones, and she was buried in the inspection pit beneath their garage, which, not to get off track,
What's
that's
an
kind of,
inspection?
I thought it was like when you pull in to change your oil. How cool is that to have at your house?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
But they chunked her ass in there and buried her. But I was
I
just
love that you
like,
say chunk, by the way. Instead of chuck.
made things weird. But but that's the part that I was just like, huh. I don't know if I just read so much fucked up shit by this point that I was like, I want an inspection pit, not to put bodies in, mind you, but that'd
Look out,
be
Dave.
super convenient to sharpen the lawnmower blades, to change the oil, to just.
I like that you say you want to inspection pit, not for bodies. And then the first thing you talk about is sharpening blades. Just saying.
I said lawnmower blades. I didn't say I needed to be
It doesn't matter.
in a pit sharpening my kitchen knives.
So do you remember the garage next door?
Yeah,
They had
yes.
one in that garage.
Well, yeah, the workshop kind of thing.
Yeah. But I don't think you could have put a
Lawnmower over it.
lawnmower on that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe some
probably not.
boards. I don't know. There you go.
Well, 5 victims are going to end up buried in the cellar on Cromwell
Jesus.
Street between 1973 and April 1975.
Okay, so there's different cases that we've talked about or listened to from other podcasts or TV shows, whatever, and they always like the ones that they bury them in the cellar or whatever. How do you avoid the smell?
I don't know.
Like you would think that that would smell really bad. Like, have you ever caught a mouse or whatever? Like at the shop, Jason caught a mouse and we didn't go back for a few days. That little tiny mouse reeks to high heaven. So I can only imagine what a decomposing corpse, let alone 5 of them, in
So
your basement smells like.
I think I have a little bit of an explanation. Now, this is not written in here because turns out people don't write articles with that thorough of details. But I feel like so he had a history of working in a slaughterhouse. He also worked on a farm and slaughtered animals, I'm sure. But so if it's going to be the blood and all your juices that start to stink. So just like any other meat, if you get rid of the fluids, carve it up and all that, I feel like that's why the smell was reduced. Yeah, it's going to rot, but the smell won't be as bad. So I do feel like when they were chopping them up in the tubs and draining the blood and everything, that kind of helped get rid of a lot of smell. And I don't know, cellar wise, maybe some charcoal absorbed smells. But
Ugh.
I have no earthly idea how really all this.
What do they do with all the flesh?
Well, they were on there.
Well, you would think as that decomposes, it liquefies and reeks.
Andrea, I don't do this. So
You're not a
other than
doctor.
no one explained or a smell of having to investigate. So whatever they did it well. I'm just thinking since all these bodies are dismembered, it had to have been for a purpose. Obviously, I mean, I get a smaller hole, but you don't need to chisel down to fingers and bones. So I feel like just like you would store meat or anything else, he was doing some sort of mechanical process he was used to and had done, and that's why he was able to do it and not. I don't know, Andrea. Now, the first victim to go into
Don't yell at
this.
me.
Now, the first victim to go into the cellar floor would be 15-year-old Carol Ann Cooper. Now, that was November 10th, 1973. She was abducted after an evening at the movies with her boyfriend. She was dragged into Fred's van, where she was bound, gagged, and brought home for them to suspend to the ceiling and have their way with her before murdering her, dismembering her, and burying her in a shallow grave in the cellar. Now,
Where
with
was the boyfriend?
still looking for her at the movies because they were out and then she's just gone.
It's crazy.
So with each victim, the abuse escalates. The next 4 victims that go into the ground, it's the same scenario of they're abducted, they're brought home, they're raped, they're dismembered, they're thrown into that shallow cellar grave. Their ages 15 to 21. And then that brings us to April 1975. We'll go into detail of those other 4 when they come up. But I promise we'll go back. They're not just marks on a board. Yeah.
Yeah. A
But
notch on the belt.
that brings us to April 1975. 18-year-old Juanita Mott. She's murdered and buried in the cellar. Fred concretes over the floor of the cellar and converts it into a bedroom for the oldest children, which I find particularly disgusting, but that might account for the smell. So maybe there was starting to be an odor, so they concrete over the whole thing. Now, It's not known if any other murders occur between 1975 or 1978 because there are no remains and the Wests aren't exactly carrying documentation of what they're doing. I feel like there probably are because different reports will say no, they're going for young females between 15 and 21 who are either hitchhiking or easily abducted from areas, particularly like bus stations or the movie theater, of where it's busy, it's loud, it's easy to just snatch somebody and go. So if you look at the missing person records between 1975 and 1970, there are people missing between that time period that have still not been located, no bodies, nothing. So I feel like since the West will say or Fred will say he killed, like, I think upwards of 20 or 30 people, and they don't find that many bodies. So I feel like that list is longer than what we know. It's just they can only charge them with what they find.
Jesus.
Now they convert the cellar to a bedroom for the older children. And then Fred meets Shirley Robinson, 18 years old.
I don't understand how he's able to meet all these women. Like,
Well, he meets her at his cafe.
I thought that went out of business.
Well, this is 78, so that's why I was telling you that in that same chunk.
Okay.
So again, it's not that much time frame that goes between these. So when the cafe goes under, I think that's when they go to more of the bus stops and hitchhikers, which makes me think the cafe was almost like an easy place for him to meet people and then be impressed, like, this is mine. Yeah, well, it's a shitty cafe that's barely operating.
It's because it's serving its purpose of meeting their new victims. I guarantee you there were probably more victims laced in between there where they're not sure if there's more victims, but there probably were. They just
Well,
didn't get attached to them, and they probably met them at their shitty little cafe.
eventually people do come forward down the road that were like raped and set free kind of thing. Kind of down the road of people who probably initially met them thinking they were going to get to sleep with a prostitute, but then things got very dark, and then when they were released they walked away, like maybe rubbing their asshole or whatever part was mutilated.
Violated,
Yeah,
yeah.
better word, but didn't want to report it because it's embarrassing and they don't
Well,
want to
and they
relive
sought it
that.
out, but they
Yeah,
sought it out.
they
So,
they sought it out, and as much as, again, even if you seek it out and then it goes way wrong, that doesn't make it okay. But at the same time, you'd have to testify publicly that that's what you were doing.
yeah.
So that's where I think they were able to do whatever they wanted to do and set people loose, because go ahead, go tell that person that you put on this little leather mask and wanted me to spank you. Like, by the way, we'll let your wife know too.
Yeah. Well,
So Fred meets Shirley Robinson at a cafe. She's 18 years old and moves in and becomes a lodger with the Wests. Shirley was heavily pregnant at the time of her murder. Rosemary, also pregnant, would boast to the neighbors that Shirley's baby was Fred's. Now, I don't know if it was Fred and Rosemary's hatched plan to sell Shirley's baby, but Fred and Shirley have pictures taken together, and Fred, I don't know if he had a coupleless or a childless couple already picked out, but that seemed to be what the plan was. And then Rosemary starts to develop resentment of her, which is believed to have what led to her murder. Now, Shirley's body was extensively dismembered, but no restraints were found, like with some of the other bodies. And then her unborn baby was also removed and had several bones missing.
oh,
So
Jesus Christ, that's disgusting.
the level of dissection for all the bodies was on a whole nother level. But shortly afterwards, Rosemary files for maternity benefits under Shirley's name. Now, as with Charmaine and Linda, the West would tell anyone who would ask questions that Shirley moved away. Now, in
I feel like it
1970,
takes a special place of like, it makes me wonder if it's, um, what's her face that dismembered the baby because she's like got so much hatred for this chick?
So I don't know, only because keep in mind the first murder Fred does is Anne McFall, and she's pregnant. That baby too is removed and pieces missing. So part of me is curious if he was trying to figure out how to be an abortion doctor, or maybe he thought that he could harvest the baby without, maybe Shirley didn't want to sell the baby, and Fred thought he could fish it out himself.
That's disgusting.
I don't know that that's what happened, but in my mind, I was like, okay, so if he's hatching this plan, he could sell the baby. And it's just like, huh, I don't know how him and Rosemary didn't come up with that idea with the way she was cranking them out. That would have been the best thing for their kids. But that's where my head went with when somebody tried to remove the baby, and he could have had that as an original idea, since why wait until they're that far along, you know?
Yeah. Well, on that note, there's that lady from Craigslist that that sought out the pregnant lady saying she had baby clothes and then tried to or then
Yeah,
did the
cut it out.
C-section. Yeah. I'm wondering if it was
And
like
then
maybe
mind
he wanted
you,
to sell the baby kind of
yeah.
deal.
Well, that's what I was kind of figuring, and then you also gotta factor in he's doesn't have a lot of education and just is a wild man with a knife.
Yeah.
So, that leads him to find 16-year-old Allison Chambers, a runaway from a children's home.
These are like such young kids.
So again, initially, she's propositioned to be the nanny for the Wests. They promise Allison that she could live a peaceful life on their farm that they owned, that they do not, by the way. Her
I was
body
just about to
was
say, wait, when did they get farms?
They
Like,
didn't,
he's
but this
not
is
busy enough with all the females. He's got to get more
yeah,
animals.
but it's like one of those, anything to paint the picture of, "Get into my van, little girl."
Yeah.
Her body is buried close to the bathroom wall. It's dismembered. Prior to her death, she wrote a letter home. This was mailed to her family after her death, only when they inquired to where she was at the Wests.
I wonder how they got her to write that letter, if it was
Well,
willing and then they just held on to it, or if it
I
was,
I kind of felt like since she kept in touch with them, that maybe it was when she meant to mail, they stumbled upon it, and then when her parents asked how she was, and then they eventually say, "Well, she just left. I don't know where she is."
yeah,
Which, not that they're the only people to exclusively exploit runaways and just teens that are in the wind,
yeah,
because they're easy pickings. Nobody notices when they're gone, and it's hard to say where and when they disappeared. So that's why I was saying I don't believe they stopped killing anybody. I think they just got better about where they put them.
yeah.
Now, um, Heather and May. Heather's 9, May's 7. This is around the time that they start becoming the sexual focus of their dad and mom,
Mhm.
um, mainly because Anna Marie runs away. Now, Anna Marie, right around the time she runs away, she's discharged from the hospital after being treated for an ectopic pregnancy when she's 15.
Aw.
Now, days after being released, Rosemary severely beats her and kicks her in the stomach. Um, so I don't blame Anna Marie for calling it quits, but she skedaddles out of there at 15, and it's amazing. She doesn't end up running into somebody who wishes her worse fate than her parents. Hard to imagine they're out there, but so she leaves, and with her being gone, the next girls up are Heather and May.
But she didn't go to the police or anything.
I don't know if it's a case of just like they were arrested before. When I mean, she was there for that one, she saw that they came back home. So I don't know if it was a case of she was afraid that they'd send her back, and she knows what happens if you run away and then come back. So I don't know where she goes, but she's gone. Heather and May's abuse increase as they get closer to puberty, and Fred would explain to them, "I made you. I can do what I like with you."
That's
Um,
disgusting.
Now something yeah, disgusting. Now something worth noting, that so I told you that 3 of the children were not his.
Hmm.
he would not rape or molest any of his daughters who were not his own.
Wait,
So
what?
so I thought it was weird that, okay, so let me see if I can wrap my head around this Looney Tunes logic. His children that he are his, he can rape and do whatever. He can also pick up runaways if they're 15 or upwards and do what he wants with them. But if they're under 15 and not his children, he is not allowed to molest them.
That's quite the line drawn in the sand for him.
Yeah, I thought it
Does
was like a, oh, right.
and does his wife agree with that? Or does she abuse those kids also?
I don't know if there were deep conversations on the subject, but that was
I don't
just,
feel like there were a lot of deep conversations between the two of them.
yeah. Well, that would mean Fred was capable of one, but um, he would also tell them he wanted to get them pregnant and he would force them to watch porn with him.
Okay.
Yes. So keeping that gene pool very
Hey,
shallow.
anyway, continue on.
Okay, so we're in the mid 80s about now. So the girls are teenage and the eye of their father's sexual desires. Heather,
Mhm.
May, and Steven are all close in age and develop a plan to stick together to avoid one of the girls being raped. They only shower or undress when Fred is either gone or somebody's there to stand by the door, which is just so sad that these children have to come up with these schemes so they can have their peace.
Well, I'm
Um,
surprised that even deters him, because if he's doing it to all 3 of them, you'd think he wouldn't give a shit if one of them's standing there.
Steven's a boy, so he hasn't touched Steven. It's,
But as mommy,
well, I think she's busy with clients, so
that
just
doesn't
one of
seem
those. I think it's disgusting that if they go to get in the shower, that means they're open for business. That means if they go to change into their pajamas or get ready for school, they're fair game. What is that?
so, I know this is like apples to oranges-ish, but there was Devin would get mad at me for not remembering his name, but there is a not my kid's name, jeez, but there's a serial killer that's on record saying that he would go from door to door looking for victims, and if the door was unlocked, he took it as an invitation to come in. Now, my connection with this is I would see that since the fucked up brains seem to go correlate with each other, that if they're undressing, that's like an invitation. Does that make sense? Like, it doesn't make sense, but do you see what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
nah, I get where you're
it's
going.
yeah, it's maybe not a great way that I just communicated that, but
Yeah. So Fred would tell Steven that I don't know whether to brace himself mentally, but that he would be required to have sex with his mother before he turned 17. So just letting them know that, just so you know, you can't leave this house until you put it in your mall. Now, May resist, or at one point resisted her father's fondling her. So he beat her with a vacuum cleaner. I guess because it was nearby, but he didn't like that she was repulsed by him or like leaned away when he went to cop a feel. Now, Heather was older than May and would begin biting her nails down to where they would bleed. She would also start drinking alcohol, bouncing in her chair. She would wake up screaming from her nightmares that she was clearly a bothered young lady.
I feel like
No,
waking up from her nightmares is not a thing because she's going
she's
to wake
living
up
it.
and she's still yeah.
So Fred and Rosemary would explain her behavior that she's a lesbian and now would taunt her and say she's ugly and uh, that's why she was so uncomfortable with her father's penis was because she liked girls.
I
Now,
mean, first of all, that's not a thing, but mommy dearest over there is literally started off her prostitution ring with women and violating them with giant ass dildos or whatever. So,
so Heather would confide in May and Stephen that she wanted to run away and live like a nomad and never see another human again.
can't blame her.
Heather would also tell her friends of the abuse that was happening at home. Now, staff at school would start to become concerned because, like, when it would come to gym, she wouldn't want to participate because she wouldn't change in the locker room. And she was an otherwise great student and would listen to anything she was told, but she would flat refuse. And it was kind of one of those, something was clearly not right, but they weren't going to force her. So at
Yeah.
least there was that, but they noted the concern, but didn't say anything. Peers and staff would also note welts and bruises on her legs and arms, and she would tell staff her siblings did it. But to her friends, she would tell them that her parents had done it because she deserved it. And that too breaks my heart
That's
a little bit
sad.
because it's just like uh, she's believing what I mean, she's such a victim.
Poor baby.
But by the mid 1980s, there's school rumors going around of Rosemary's sex life spreading around the school. And Heather would tell her friends that every bit of it's true. And now some of Fred's coworkers have kids that go to that school and would tell Fred's coworkers. So it naturally leads back to Fred and Rosemary. And when they find that out, Fred starts escorting Heather to and from school, and she's not really allowed to talk to anybody. She's either in class or she's coming home. So the little shred that she had escaping them now is just like dashed.
Yeah.
So by 1986, Heather starts applying for jobs in order to like pave her way to get out. But then she gets a letter in the mail denying her. I think it was like a live-in nanny kind of thing. But
I'd
she
be
would.
scared. I
Right?
know she wants out, but after seeing what she's seen with her parents.
I feel like all these children don't realize that there is worse out there. Not saying that they should stay with it, not at all, but they so blindly want to run away that they don't realize that they could run into the clutches of something far worse. And it's
Yeah.
just like I wish I wish at that point there was somebody to be there for them, a
Yeah.
teacher, anybody. But she gets the letter in the mail denying her, and she stays up all night crying. The
Poor
next
thing.
morning, she's back to doing her bouncing and nail biting, um, and she doesn't go to school. Her siblings leave without her, and that's the last time they see Heather. They were told she took the job, but none of the children say anything. They knew that she was denied in the letter that she got, so they kind of knew that that wasn't true, but they're also children at the same time, so they don't know how that works, so they just kind of let it go. Now, when more time passes, her siblings ask about her and why she hasn't said, how she's doing or where she's at, and that they want to report her missing because they haven't heard anything and they're worried. And Fred tells them that they can't contact her because she's deep in a card scam with her boyfriend. And then as the years progress, Fred will joke with the children that if they don't behave, they'll end up under the patio just like Heather.
Oh God.
Yeah. So it's like now given when he would say that, he would follow it up with him laughing. And later on, that's when the kids as adults will say they didn't think that they actually put her in the garden because he would laugh after it. Now, with Rosemary's approval, Fred will build a barbecue pit opposite where Heather's buried and then set a table over her grave where the family would sit.
That's sick.
It truly is. Now, anytime they're asked, Heather's disappearance would be explained differently each time. I don't know if it's a matter of the guy's a fucking moron and can't remember his stories, or he's just an idiot and thinks that he needs to come up with a better one every time he's asked. But it'll lead to more inquiries about her whereabouts because it doesn't take long before people are like, wait, they said what? And then, back and forth of where Heather's at.
Yeah.
Especially because teenager, her friends want to know where she's at. Like, where did she just up and go away? And you figure the friends that she confided in have probably got to be afraid for her. But
I wish there were some kind of busybody adult that was just like,
sniffing around.
yeah, and stood up for these kids. Like something couldn't have, like, ugh,
Well, how about the friend's mom who called the police on him before?
yeah.
But I imagine it'd have to be very awkward if once they got released. Like, I don't even understand how they were able to live there. But anywho, so that brings us to May 1992. Fred asks 13-year-old daughter Louise to bring bottles to the first floor. The rest of the family proceed to hear her screaming, "No," and "Don't." Um, Later that day, they find her in pain and sobbing and find out that Fred raped and sodomized her and at one point partially strangled her. When Rosemary gets home, Louise tells her what Fred did, and she replies, "Oh, well, you've been asking for it." Over the
What?
next, I, I told you I had to put this shit down several times because it just got so disgusting. And every time I thought it can't get worse. And then when they got arrested, it's like, this cannot be real.
I,
But
ugh,
yeah, the
you're making me
next,
want to go pull my kids out of school just so I can
hug
give them a
them.
hug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the next few weeks, she's raped 3 more times, Rosemary being there for one and filming the other. So I
Oh
don't know if he
gosh.
filmed it so Rosemary could watch it or what that purpose was, but Louise tells her friend, who tells her mother, and her mother calls the police on August 4th, 1992. Now, mind you, this happened in May, so the police are called in August. 2 days later, the police have a search warrant to search the property under the guise of looking for stolen property, rather than just saying we're gonna see if it looks like shit's going down over here. Now they find 99 pornographic videos, both commercial and homemade, but none of them were of Louise's rape, which to me was like, who the hell got that job to watch 99 pornographic videos from start to finish to see if you could find a 13-year-old's rape on it? Not
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Definitely not it on that one. Wow.
Now, 13-year-old Louise makes a statement to police via a specially trained solicitor. Her abuse started at age 11, and her mother was casually indifferent to all of the going ons. Now, at this point, the children, or the younger children at least, are placed in foster care, and medical exams reveal evidence of physical abuse and sexual abuse.
On the
The
younger kids?
Yes. So the children also told of Fred saying Heather was under the patio, but Fred would claim Heather was alive and well and working as a prostitute, and that's why they didn't know where she was. And then
Mm-hmm.
Rosemary would chime in and say she left because she's a lesbian. They gave her money, and she remains sporadically in contact with us, but she goes all over the place, so it's impossible for us to say where she's at. But for me, I don't understand, like, how is it supposed to explain everything by going, "Oh, she's a lesbian"? What?
I
Like,
don't know.
these two, like, so many times I just do the what?
I
So
guess because it was more frowned upon and people got sent away
either that
from
or
their
it was
families.
such like a something no one wanted to talk about that if they
Yeah,
just
like it
threw
was
in
so
she's a
taboo.
lesbian, yeah,
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh, yeah, well, we're not talking about that." But I just thought
Well,
it was
the it
such a
well,
stupid explanation. "Oh, no, she left, she's a lesbian." "Oh, okay. In that note, let's go on to do something else,
well,
George."
like, it was such a taboo thing that maybe the police looked at it like, "Oh, yeah, she's troubled. No wonder she's gone." You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Or
yeah,
that's what they hoped the police would do. Hopefully, the police did their job and
yeah.
carry on.
5 days after that search warrant, Fred is charged with 3 counts of rape, 1 of buggery, which I had to Google, that's sodomy in Britain,
Okay.
which delves down to I feel like I've used, like, bugger before, and I hope that is not like, that one's out of my my vocabulary altogether, by the way, but I was like, what the fuck? But anywho, Rosemary is also arrested and charged as being an accomplice with child cruelty charges and also obstructing the police. Now, the next day, Rosemary is out on bail under the condition she's not allowed to see her children or her husband prior to trial. Fred does not get bail. Now, Anne Marie pops up, and at this point, she's 28 years old and contacts police and details her extensive mental, physical, and sexual abuse at the hands of her father and stepmother. She also mentions all these years she's been trying to locate her mother and her half sister, and then also Heather, um, that they're all missing. Now, the case against the Wests collapse because Anne Marie and Louise will not testify.
Probably because they're terrified.
The Wests are acquitted of all charges.
Please tell me they're in jail.
The kids remained in foster care because obviously
Yeah, they
they're
could prove that abuse. Okay.
so with supervised visits. Now, the
Ugh.
police continued the search for Heather, stating that there's no records that indicate she's alive at all. Police would ask Anna Marie about Fred's jokes of Heather being under the patio, and she would kind of shake her head at that and just be like, no, because he would laugh, and no one really took that seriously at all. So she didn't believe that they killed Heather, or that she was at least not buried under the patio.
Yeah,
Now,
but I feel like that's one of those that's too horrible for her brain to process
yeah.
kind of deal.
Now, mind
But
you, that's where none of these kids are aware of all the people that are in the cellar under that slab of concrete. That's why I wanted to let you know, like, this is all, I mean, several. They said this happened in the 70s. We're in the 90s, so they're pretty much gotten away with a lot of fucked up shit. And I was like, this is the second time they've just swanned on out of there.
yeah.
So February 23rd,
Wait, I have a
1990.
question. If they could prove that the younger kids had been sexually assaulted, why couldn't they get them on that?
Well, I think because they couldn't prove that they did it.
Yeah, but they're under their care. At least child neglect.
Well, I don't know what the laws were there and in that country, but to me, I thought it was probably one of those, they have no proof to say that they did it, and it could just be, oh, well, we have lodgers in the house. That could have been who did it. So it was enough to keep the kids out of the house. They did not get the kids back. So that's at least a small win there. But in
Very small.
February 1994, a search warrant is granted to search the Cromwell Street home for Heather's remains. Now, police knock on the door the morning of the 24th, and Rosemary turns white as a sheet and becomes hysterical. Stephen calls Fred and tells him he needs to get home. The police are there, which I don't understand the blind loyalty. I get they're your parents, but I'd be like, haha, you get what you get, fuckers. But I would also probably be under the slab, not waltzing around upstairs.
Yeah.
Um, so Fred comes home 3 hours later, which to me I also did. That is not immediately, sir. Like,
No.
if I told Dave, you need to hurry up and get home, and 3 hours later he waltzes in the door, I'd be like, we need to discuss what immediately means because three
Yeah.
hours not it, bubby.
He was disposing of whatever other body or criminal acts he was committing at the time.
Well, I think he was devising his plan because when he gets there, he tells police he wants to make a voluntary statement or he wants to speak to them. Let's face it, he probably didn't know what the word voluntary meant. But he would say that Heather is alive and well, but they really need to go because she is in with the drug cartel. And he claims that the stories of her being under the patio are absolutely rubbish. And they're just there because they're upset that he got acquitted of his daughter's rape. Now, police do leave.
What?
I know. I was like, what the fuck? When I tell you I had to put this case down several times, several is not enough because it was just like, what the I didn't think this was going to be as long and intertwined as it was. But that night, May and Stephen watched their parents whisper from the kitchen window as they repeatedly glanced to the garden. No, I don't know if this was like a scheme of the police, but they returned the next morning to continue their search, which I didn't even know was a thing, that if they're searching your residence, they can leave and come back and you can just be there. I don't know if those rules have changed, because to me, that seems like that gives you time for that person to get rid of evidence.
Yeah.
But so they return the next morning to continue their search. And then Fred tells them that um, he wants to confess down at the station. So they take him on into the station. Fred admits to the murder of Heather. Then he said it was out of rage. And then he dismembered her with a serrated kitchen knife in the bathroom before burying her in the garden. And he insists Rosemary knew nothing and was busy with a client. And the reason they hadn't found her is because they were digging in the wrong part of the garden. So police are like, okay. So they return to the house on the 26th. They obviously arrest Fred for murder. But they return to the house and start digging where Fred directs, and finds a pile of human remains and multiple trash bags intertwined with rope. Now, her fingers are also in a separate pile that suggested they were removed as a form of torture.
Oh, God.
And then several hours later, dental records do confirm that it is Heather. But when they piece everything out of the bags, they realize they've got an extra leg. So
Oh,
then they're
okay.
like, okay. So they go back to Fred, who's like, oh, yeah, there's other bodies in there. One of them is Shirley. She might have been pregnant with my child. And they're like, okay, well, you're now charged with both of those murders, dipshit. And then they go, yeah, Rosemary, you're going to have to move to a different place because we need to do a complete search of this whole property. So she's given the boot. I personally think when they were whispering earlier in that week that Rosemary was telling him that, if he loved her kind of thing. Let's face it, he's easy to manipulate. So she was
Yeah.
trying to do the whole, you take the rap for it and then I'll be free. And he thinks the sun shines from her ass. So he's going along with it. But so she's moved to a different house. The police
I'm
continue
surprised she didn't get the hell out of Dodge.
I don't know. With police continuing questioning with Fred about Charmaine and Catherine, which, if you've forgotten, Catherine was his first wife that went missing.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Because she wanted to know where her
her daughter
missing
was.
daughter was. Yep.
Fred
She
eventually.
finally decided to try to be a parent.
Well, Fred is an easy nut to crack and tells them the locations of that grave. And he's like, but while you're over there, Linda's also over there too. And they're just like, what the fuck is with this guy? So they recover 5 bodies in the cellar, a sixth one beneath the bathroom, and then the other 3 where he had buried them. But most of the victims had been hitchhikers that they had promised to either transport them somewhere or to hire them as their nanny. But he claims he killed the women, or some of the women, when they said they would tell Rosemary of his infidelities. But during his interview, Fred wouldn't really know how many people they had killed or that he had killed. But he guessed that it would be upwards in the 30s.
Oh my gosh.
Now,
Where are all the bodies?
they all got the heebie-jeebies out of this because Fred was relaxed and emotionless whenever he talked of his crimes, which the police officers ended up needing to bring in a specialist to be able to wrap their head around how okay Fred was with all of that, who naturally said people who are like that. I mean, he doesn't see it as bad as we do. So, obviously, a normal person isn't as okay with that. But by March 8th, 6 bodies are found in their home, each one mutilated and having evidence of being subjects of extreme sexual abuse prior to their death. And now Fred would refuse to say where the missing bones from each body was or the reason why they were taken and, just what the purpose of all that was. Even though Fred said Rosemary didn't know, anything of all the murders. April 20th, 1994, Rosemary is arrested for the rape of an 11-year-old, physical assault of an 8-year-old boy, and she is refused bail and goes to prison.
Well,
Now,
what about like, okay.
they've got, again, this is the part where it was starting to get irritating because I get they can only charge what they have evidence of. And part of
Well,
the
but like,
issue is if you're dealing with murders 20 plus years ago, it's hard to say on bones who did what.
but okay. Now you've talked about some crazy here, but she killed his daughter
We're
while
getting
he
there.
was in jail.
We're getting there. I'm just letting you know how it's unraveling of.
Okay.
So she's initially arrested because they've at least got the rape thing. Now she is charged with Linda's murder. And then Fred confesses to the murder of his first wife and his stepdaughter, but he denies killing Anne McFall. He says, I only buried her, which just like, that's the part that he's like, oh, no, no, no. I just buried her. He's such an idiot.
Well, then
Um,
again, it's like at least he's taking accountability for his actions instead of just completely covering up for his monstrous wife,
because
you
he's a
know?
moron. But Fred is charged with 12 murders, um, and Rosemary's charged with 9. She's arrested June 30th, but she's charged with those 9 in June. Neither one of them get any bond. Rosemary would publicly claim her innocence and refused to reply to any of Fred's letters and played a role of a grieving mother and her hatred of Fred, which I don't have to tell you who this reminds me of because
Mhm.
that's who I pictured.
Yeah.
Fred withdrew his confession of doing it alone and said she helped and was an integral part of the plan. So obviously, he's figured out that she's just throwing him under the bus and he's pissed about it. But then January 1st, I don't have a copy of his suicide note because it was really long. If you want to read it, you can look it up yourself. But January 1st, 1995, Fred hangs himself in his cell from blankets and tags from laundry bags he stole.
I hope he suffered.
I hope so too. He like did some sort of makeshift thing where he connected it to the door handle, then to the light fixture, then to the. It's amazing he came up with that because he's an idiot. But I don't know. It could have taken him a couple tries. But
I hope it did.
He wrote Rosemary this ridiculous suicide note of that he would give her anything in life that he could, and he has nothing left to give but his life, and for that he'll give it to her, and that was her birthday. So
Okay.
all he could give was himself, and here you go. And I was like, what? So then Rosemary went to court in February 1995. She pled not guilty. She said her defense was she just liked sadistic sex. And her defense would call a long line of women who had been attacked by just Fred without Rosemary there. Now, that would be when it got sticky because Charmaine was determined to have died while Fred was in jail, and she was charged with her death.
Good.
So it was like a yay for Charmaine at the very least. Now, the end of March, Fred is cremated. Only 4 of his children attend the funeral and have the ashes scattered. I'm surprised anyone attended, but
Well, how many are left alive? He had how many kids? 10?
yeah, probably around there.
And there's only like what? 4 or 5 alive?
Well, Charmaine wasn't his.
It doesn't matter. He was daddy in her like, you know what I mean? He
Yeah.
adopted her. That makes him daddy.
Well, after 1994, the children were all given new identities to protect them because obviously at this point, in Britain at least, this whole case is all over everywhere. So they wouldn't have any shred of an opportunity to have a normal childhood at all. So they get new names and identities and they stay in foster care. Which, not to put stuff on their adult siblings, but why didn't they? I mean, they would have been, I guess they have to go through their own stuff, so having to raise another child wouldn't have helped.
Yeah.
But
Not to get sidetracked, and I promise I'll keep this short and sweet, but have you heard of like that Turpin case?
no,
That Turpin? Turpin? So there's a it's on Hulu. I watched it and it was like it's been a while, but there were like I want to say they had 13 or 15. They had a lot of kids and they would keep them chained to the beds and abuse them. They didn't sexually abuse them that I'm aware of, but one of the girls ends up escaping. Their oldest kid was like 29 years old and the youngest I think was a baby. Like they had a lot of kids that spanned over the ages. And like
Well,
this is a recent case by the way, and the adult kids were uneducated.
yeah,
So they weren't capable of taking care of the younger siblings, and the younger siblings had more of um
a chance at a
a
foster home.
yeah, yeah, right, exactly.
Well, that's
But
why it's like
I do know.
I had
Huh?
that's why I had mixed feelings because I would think that if you're 28 years old and know that you've got siblings out there that are going to go through foster care because of what they went through, but I mean, I don't know. But again, if you're grappling with your own demons, you're not exactly a specimen to help raise them normally. You don't know
Yeah, and
what
they had
normal is.
well, and they had more years of abuse. Not saying that that makes it any worse or better for them, but like their abuse lasted for longer that they were subjected to, so it might have them more screwed up in the head.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Now, this is going to get into a little bit of the court stuff, just because we go through the victims as Fred had laid out and where they came from, how they died, and then just aftermath kind of stuff. But now Fred's younger brother, the one that was like the best man at his wedding,
John, yeah.
he hung himself in his garage in 1996 after the whole court thing, because he's named several times as raping his niece Anna Marie. Now, obviously, if that's public now, I would assume his guilt is what drove him to do that. So he about
Or he was
think
a giant ass pussy and
yeah,
committed suicide rather than face the repercussions of what he possibly did to his niece.
yeah. Now Rosemary's daughters, Anna Marie and May, both visit Rosemary in prison up until 2006 when May won't stop asking her about the murders. She won't let May visit her anymore. Now, as far as I know to this day, Anna Marie still visits her in prison. Now,
Stockholm syndrome, right?
I would guess because it's just like it's so crazy to me. Um,
Does she
now
have kids? She's older. She's like, how old is she?
I don't. Oh well. Doo-doo-doo.
She was born in the
She
70s, right? So she's
gotta
like in
put
her
it backwards.
40s. She's like late 30s, early 40s ish, I would guess.
That was the post-it note that has gone missing that I had everybody's date because I knew you were going to randomly ask me how old somebody was when I was in a different time of year because there's so many people.
Yeah. Well, just based off of our ages, not saying that we're in our 40s because we are not, but
Well, Dave's pushing 50 and they were born before Dave.
oh, were they really?
Anna Marie was born in 64.
Oh, shit.
And yeah, Anna Marie's 64.
Okay, so she's in her 50s. Does she have kids?
I don't know. Because so their names are changed. So mind
Yeah, but
that
she
one.
wrote a book.
Good point. You read it then. I had enough of this whole family because when I started down this road, I did not expect all the things I discovered.
Well, it
But
serves you right bringing all this.
Fuck, Claire, how do you find the ones that involve so many kids being raped and
and you know
molested?
what pisses
Like,
me
it
off at all
fucks with
this
my head.
is I did not go into it looking for child molesters, and then I was like, "What the
You
fuck?"
never do, but yet you find them.
I really think of me what you will. I thought it was going to be a couple tee-ha-has about some boy fucking a goat and then becoming a murderer, which I guess he does, but I didn't expect the length of kitty diddling that I had discovered. But
Yeah, no.
that brings me back to October 1996, the West home is demolished. It had affectionately been called the House of Horrors by the public and was developed as a public pathway. I would
Wait,
assume
the House of Horrors or the House of Horror?
I suppose you could call it either, but it was horrors, as in
Yeah.
the horror, not you whore, but look,
I
there
don't
was
know.
only one in there. Now, just to sum it up for you, 1967 was the first death of Anne McFall, 18 years old, 8 months pregnant with a baby girl. Then the next one was in January 1968, Mary Bass home. She's 15. She was abducted from a bus stop and roped into Fred's van and buried. The body was never found, and Fred couldn't be charged since there was no body and no evidence, but he did recognize her when the police were talking to him. So they know that that's one of the victims, but he's not charged with it. Obviously, now he's dead anyway, but it at least lets them know what happened with that. Now, June 20th, 1970, that was Charmaine. She was murdered at the age of 8, likely due to domestic rage on Rosemary's behalf. And then on August 27th, 1971, is the death of Catherine Costello, 27 years old. She was murdered when she came looking for Charmaine and was buried in a field. And August 20th, 1973, Linda Goff, 19, was the first murder that both Fred and Rosemary committed together, and buried her in what later became the bathroom. Now, in November 1973, Carol Ann Cooper, 15, a runaway from a group home, was murdered and buried in the cellar. Then December 27th, 1973, Lucy Paddington, 21, was abducted at a bus stop. Fred was admitted to the hospital for serious lacerations of his right hand, possibly sustained during her dismemberment. So that's one reason why there's a specific date, because again, they weren't exactly recording them.
Yeah.
Now, the next girl was April 16th, 1974. Her name is Therese. I do not know how to spell or say her name. It's Siengenthealer. She's Swiss, so even her name had all sorts of little accent things over it. But she was 21 and was a college student that was abducted when she was hitchhiking. But again, she was Swiss, but Fred mistook her as being Dutch and would call her his tulip, which
That's disgusting.
He is. And then in November 1974, Shirley Hubbard, 15, was abducted from her foster home when she was at a bus, or she was a foster child, but was abducted at a bus stop as she waited to travel home from that movie date. Juanita Mott was murdered April 12th, 1975. She was a former lodger of the West, and they abducted her while she was hitchhiking. I feel like when people would go to leave, that was when they would abduct them, because the other lodgers would think that they left, which they did. But then if they went back and kidnapped them, that was a good excuse if they already left willingly, you know?
Yeah.
Then in May 10th, 1978 was Shirley Robinson. She was 18 years old and 8 months pregnant with Fred's baby. And then August 5th, 1979, Allison Chambers, 16, was a runaway from a group home, and her death was described by Fred as being Rosemary's fault because she was getting too vicious with her sex.
Mm-hmm.
You know it's bad when it's coming from Fred.
Yeah. Like, okay.
And then June 19th, 1987 was when Heather West was murdered at 16. And now that brings me to a little current nugget. Now,
Joy.
May 2021, I haven't seen any results of this, and I'm going to keep digging because
Please don't. No, I'm just
I
kidding.
want to
Keep
know
going.
why there's such a leap from, we're talking 1995 and 96 to 2021. The police searched the cafe in Gloucester, but found no bodies. And now it was originally searched because Fred was known to have done plumbing work there during, like in the 1960s. So they weren't sure if that was where some of the bodies were. Because again, I mean, it'd be nice if he were still alive to be able to powwow with
Fess up.
him.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of potential people that have not been found. And like I said, during those chunks when they don't have bodies that were buried at their house,
Yeah, I
there are
highly doubt.
people there are people on that missing list that fit the criteria and location where they were picking up people. So,
They just haven't found the bodies yet.
and I don't think they will. So when they originally went to search the field where Fred said he buried them, they had a very hard time finding them because he buried them in like a tube like hole. So like
Wait,
not a post hole digger, but they dug the field almost the size of an Olympic swimming pool before they found the bodies.
holy crap.
Yeah, and at that point they were almost near giving up, but because he dug them, and not to give anybody any ideas, but he didn't bury them going sideways like a normal grave would be. Since he chopped them up, he did a narrow hole and just threw them down the hole,
Yeah, less surface area to find the.
which made it very hard for them to find when you're talking about you don't know where in this field. So my guess would be they're not going to find those bodies. Now, that gives me, like, now this is afterwards. Obviously, Rosemary's found guilty. I am so glad that she was, because if she got out, I think somebody would have killed her. She is still in prison, and she's going on about 68 years old. Now, in 2004, the youngest son, Barry, would claim he was home when Heather was murdered and that he remembers Fred and Rosemary restraining her and then stomping on her head until she stopped moving.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Now, you remember Stephen, he's the oldest boy. He would go to jail that same year that Barry made that claim, for having sex with a 14-year-old. Now Stephen is 30 years old when this happens. And it's not like he was raping her. They had a supposedly consensual relationship, but they were found out when Stephen took her to have an abortion. Now, due
How
to
old was he?
30,
And she was how old?
14.
Did he go to jail?
Yes, I said he went to jail in 2004.
But did he stay?
No. Well, it was consensual. So it wasn't.
I don't
It was not
care.
it was not necessarily like a way to go, son. But anywho, now he would have a known drug problem and clearly psychiatric issues because of his childhood trauma, which leads to him overdosing at the age of 40 in 2022 or 2020. Sorry, 2020.
Wow.
Now that is all I have for this case.
So that definitely could have been a 3-parter. I realized we had a 11-minute gap, but even if you knock off 15 minutes of this,
Hey, I
holy
tried
crap.
to forewarn you that this one, the more I dug, and then when I was like, fuck me, I started in 1960, actually, technically, when Fred was born in 1941, and I was like, there are updates to 2020. Now, mind you, I didn't even think of doing updates on any of the children kind of thing, but I thought it was sad that the youngest son kind of followed in his dad's footsteps. At least it wasn't his daughter, but still shooting for very young
children.
Yeah. But now I have not read the book Anna Marie wrote that documents her sufferings at her stepmom's hand. But there's plenty of documentaries. There's a movie on Netflix. There's always a movie on Netflix about any of this shit. But there's several books. And if you wanted to go down the route of hearing what Anna Marie endured or where she's at in her life, you're welcome to investigate. I have dug enough into this, and
so I know this is going to probably get me some hate. And I honestly, It is what it is. But Anna Marie is the one that still visits her mother in jail, correct?
Yep.
So she's profiting off of talking about how badly she was treated, but yet visits the woman?
I don't know if that's maybe she's hoping that they'll, in those discussions, she'll tell her where some of the other bodies are. But I don't even know if she would know where the bodies are, since that was what Fred was charged with doing.
Well, is she still, as far as you know, visiting her mother person?
Yes.
So again, I say, technically there's no blood relation. That's her stepmother who murdered her sister.
That is true. I keep forgetting because there's so many people that Anna Marie is not.
And told her
Rosemary's.
that her biological mother didn't want her because she had the wrong skin color, and yet she's still going back. I honestly would not read her book just because I feel like it's a little hypocritical. I realize she's been through hell, and I'm not taking away from that in any way, shape, or form. I feel sorry for child version of her. I pray to God that none of these kids, if they are still screwed up in the head, had children to carry on this disaster of child rearing. Pardon the language because it sounds disgusting now. But you get what I mean, though? Like,
Yes.
if I were to write a book about my horrible ass childhood, not saying that I did, because I have nothing to compare to that, not even close. But like, it seems hypocritical that you continue to interact with the person that you're claiming tortured you so badly. Not even claiming, that did torture you and murdered your mother and your siblings. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I just thought it was crazy also.
Hey,
That
do
when
we
you
know
think
about her
about the
biological father?
what?
Did she ever, like, with DNA stuff? It'd be interesting to know if, like, she ever found her biological dad.
I don't know, because you got to think that that's even before 1940. So
Yeah, but
if he passed away, although I guess if he had any other children,
or relatives,
but yeah, she'd be like a
be able to
cousin.
connect it. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
I don't know.
Yeah, I
Now,
know.
when they were first arrested for Heather's murder, that Stephen and Heather, not Heather, Stephen and May, had a brain fart there. They didn't initially believe it. Like, Stephen just turned into a basket of tears, and May was like, "No, he didn't kill our sister." And to me, it was like, "What are you've lived through this? How is it not like a yes, they did? Here
How
are
old
her.
was
Here
how
are
old was
they're
May?
adults." That's why they were home when the police left that first night and then came back, and Stephen and May were there. They're grown ass adults.
I mean, to be fair though, Stephen was told to mentally prepare himself at 17 to have sex with his mommy. So I feel like the brainwashing and abuse,
Yeah,
and May was sexually abused also, like,
they did a very thorough job.
of fucking up
They
their kids.
They did, because we're talking they're in their 20s and at home, and even at the police saying, that your sister is probably murdered by them, that it's a no, no.
Well, I don't know if anybody else was mind fucked over the course of these episodes, but good job, Claire, because you definitely messed with mine.
That was the goal. Homicides
You
are the
succeeded.
hobbies. I'll try to lay off the child abuse,
You think you can manage that one? I would appreciate it.
incest, and bestiality. I'll try to go
I mean, the bestiality was kind of funny. Like, not saying the animal cruelty is acceptable. However, that shit's funny as hell. Like, come on, son. Let's go fuck the farm animals today. Oh, and when you're done, let's go tag team Ma. Like, what the hell? Hey, whatever happened to his parents? I realize they're dead, but like, obviously they were keeled over before
anything.
any of this came to light.
I
I'm
just
saying
thought they very narrowly got away with every bit of it. Because you figure after the police dug up the first day and didn't find her when they came back, if Fred wouldn't have said, "You're looking in the wrong spot," and they're like, "Okay." And then, not to say one consecutive life sentence wouldn't be bad enough, but when they were like, "Yeah, we found a third leg," and he's like, "Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you, that's Shirley."
How did they even find a third leg? Like, they were murdering them so quickly that they were just, like, confusing body parts, or they just
Well,
used the same hole to drop certain parts in? They're like, "Ah, this hole looks kinda full now, I guess we'll fill it in. Oh, wait, we could throw one more leg in there." Like,
well,
that doesn't even
so
make sense to me.
So the house looked like almost like a townhouse kind of thing where they're close proximity, not a big yard, which is why I didn't understand how they could do so much digging without anybody saying anything. And then um I just they were didn't have a big enough yard to put them all. Which is why after they concreted over the bottom, wherever he started going, and I guess the whole and he, again, if he wouldn't have said anything about the field, they would have never found those bodies either. So it's just other than he's a fucking idiot. And I think that's what Rosemary was mad about. She didn't tell him to go on and start confessing to everything,
Yeah.
but he's so easily persuaded. It
It
just
sounds
took him
like he
a
was kinda proud of himself too, and he's like, "Ah, screw it. I got caught for one. What's the difference?"
But between that and, like, "Oh, no, yeah, no, 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 Heather didn't have 3 legs," is what I, like, in my head, like, "That's another one. There's a couple down there, and then one over by the bathroom, and then a couple in the cellar."
It's like playing it's okay.
And while
It's
you're
like doing an
digging,
egg
you
hunt.
might
It's like doing a treasure hunt or an egg hunt with your kids, and it's like, "Okay, hot and cold time." No. "Oh, you silly little goose, you found the wrong spot. Go look over here.
Yes.
I done a good job hiding them."
But now when I tell you that I spent so many hours on this and I had to put it down because again, like when it got to the point where like they took little 8-year-old Anna Marie in the basement kind of thing, it was just like I couldn't just look up and go, Dave, what'd you want for dinner? Like I had to go take my dogs for a walk, do something that
Hang
get
out with
her
my
out.
8-year-old.
And I could not do that before going to bed either. So when it was just like, "Yeah, I'm not taking notes before bed. Mm-mm, no, no, thank you."
Well, I told you I was telling Jason about that one case, where the Ripper Crew. If you guys haven't listened to that one, that's another one Claire did that'll mind fuck you.
Had
Um,
some good ones, don't I?
yeah. So I told Jason about that one, like, you're just
Oh, we should have
the
let
gory
them
details
we
and, like, the jizz cutting or
tit
the
licking.
jizz on the tit and then slicing and eating all that, and Jason was just, like, trying to go to sleep, but because he asked about our episode that we recorded, I got so excited, I was sitting up on the bed, like, on my knees, like, excitedly telling him about your case and how it was just so disgusting, and he just kinda opened his one eye, looked at me, and was like, "Yeah, maybe we shouldn't talk about this before bed." He's like, "Spare me these details next time," and I was like, "But you asked," and he's like, "Forget it.
Don't you
I
wanna
will
know what
never
our
ask."
work is?
But it's just funny because, like, I get the whole not talking about it before bed,
Yeah,
kinda,
well, it cannot be the shit that I think about when I lay my head on the pillow.
you know? Nope.
But I can tell you it
Anyhow.
was also equally hard to put down when it was like they were arrested and I was like, "Yay!" But I do know that there's murders after this date, so I'm confused.
And then you see they get out and it's like, "No."
Well, and it kind of goes right back to I realize this is I don't want to say a long time ago, but it's long enough ago that I understand people weren't as like I don't know, noticing some of the shit that would go on
I
and
feel like people
intervening.
turned a blind eye because they didn't wanna believe that people could do this
Yeah,
level of disgust to their own family members.
yeah. So that's where it was just like I know school wise, I want to think that things are changed now, and a kid covered in bruises and welts would not just be sloughed off onto the kids doing it, even if it's another kid doing it. Something needs to happen. And I know social workers do not get paid enough, and there's not enough of them for all the kids that I know still fall through cracks. It's just so sad to me that how did they not go to jail? How did, like, again, not a not a doctor, not a lawyer, not a police officer, but how is it that they can have the kids taken away, or the 11-year-old when that situation, when they're arrested for that? How is it that just because she decides not to testify, how come it's not like with domestic abuse that the wife might decide not to press charges, but the state will?
Yeah, well, that's what I was like.
That she already made a statement. Why can't they use her statement? I realize it's not as powerful as coming from her talking on trial, or maybe there's rules against, they weren't able to cross-examine her in that statement. And again, it was several months later, so there's no evidence of anything.
They could do an exam and see she's been.
But even then, that's like weak sauce on the side of she could have been with anybody
sexually
else.
active. Yeah.
But it was so frustrating that because she didn't want to testify, and I know it was out of fear and like that.
I don't understand how it's not.
How are there not any protection?
In the realm? Yeah, like it's not in the realm of understanding that somebody would be afraid to testify, and she's a child.
A child that went through a serious trauma, and you want her to get up there and be
not even a serious trauma, but a serious trauma at the hands of her parents. Like that's even, to me, that makes it even worse, because your parents are the ones that are supposed to love you and protect you, and you're being physically abused.
Well,
and mentally and sexually, like she's in every realm humanly possible, she was being abused. I don't understand why the state didn't look at it like, or the crown or whatever it's referred to as, like making sense that they needed to find another way to help this child.
Yeah, I'm glad that they stuck with it, what they did, because if they wouldn't have pursued digging up the garden, they would have never gotten caught.
Yeah.
I mean, you figure even digging up the garden, they didn't find him. It's just fortunate Fred's an idiot.
Well, it's fortunate that they went back and asked him a few more questions, and he's just like, oh no.
Well, so when they were questioning
I did a good job hiding him.
So in there were like a 3-day gap between when they got the search warrant and then when they dug, and then the gap of time between Fred telling him, you were in the wrong part of the garden. They were interrogating him over a span of like 16-hour days.
That's Lord.
So they were.
I wonder how much of it was exhausted confession then versus like.
I think some of it was just him alone in a room kind of thing, and then them just like, okay, well, how about this, or how about that, or what happened here, just letting him talk, because they did have a lot of stuff that they were able to use against Rosemary. So at least, at the very least, he was able to talk enough that got Rosemary put away, because if he would have just killed himself and then she would have proclaimed her innocence, that she very well could have been walking free. Which is disgusting.
Yeah, that psycho bitch deserves to rot in prison.
But again, those two are the two most prolific serial killers of Britain's history.
I mean, yeah. But, yeah, ew. Just, ugh. Thanks for that.
But again, that's why that first part, even just going into it, that they are fucked up individuals that found each other, but their backgrounds are disgustingly similar, minus the bestiality on Fred's end. But
like all the parents in this, like starting with Fred and Twat Waffles parents, I don't know why, but I can't remember her name.
Rosemary.
Like I should be able to remember it, but
I thought of The Exorcist.
Well, I was going to say, well, the movie, The Rosemary's Baby, the Stephen King. I keep blocking that one out because I don't want to sit here and laugh about it, because she's not funny. but their parents were pieces of shit too. Like,
again,
to see the trail of abuse continue.
That's why I couldn't help but go backwards, because then when you see that, and I don't think there's documents to go backwards one more time, because even Fred's parents, they had to have been the hand of incest for them to think that behavior was okay. So it's just like, and then the second Rosemary and Fred found each other, that's when the cruelty just really went off the chain.
Because it was their normal.
Yeah,
and
well,
I feel
I
like,
guess,
not to excuse Rosemary, because I can't stand that cunt waffle, and I feel like she deserves every bit of prison, and I hope she gets her ass beat on the daily. But I had a point to that.
you just wanted to say cunt waffle again.
No, it was twat waffle before. Now it's
cunt waffle. Doesn't have the same ring.
No, twat waffle.
Maybe since we're in the European side of things, it can be a cunt crepe.
There you go. Ew.
Powdered sugar, anyone? Okay. Well, I feel like we've taken so much time that, like, enjoy the therapy that comes after this.
Congratulations, Claire. My mind has been fucked for the day.
Yay!
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mind fucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.
And I'm Claire.
That's all we've got.